Welcome back, everyone, to our study of the parables of Jesus. Truly a fascinating journey when you go through the Gospels, when you consider the teaching ministry of Jesus. Obviously, it's been much pored over by many scholars, many researchers, many teachers. And I think we could say this with certainty, is that it never gets old, right? When you look at the teachings of Jesus, particularly these parables, and they're rich with meaning. There's obviously information to receive, but Lord willing, there'll be transformation as the result of application. And so we want to talk today about this beautiful parable found in Matthew 25, and it's the parable of the talents. Now, it's not to be confused with Luke's parable that's dealing with something else. Similar verbiage, but it's a totally different parable. The parable of the talents in Matthew 25, verses 14 down through 30, has a lot to do with God's picture of the kingdom, of how we're to be waiting for the kingdom of God, and how we're to be busy doing God's will. And so it's something that's very much so relevant in any generation, but particularly here in this chapter 25, what we're learning here is that God wants us to have a certain type of focus. And the parable of the talents will help us have that. Let me tell you what this is not about. This is not about money, this parable. Some people make it about money, like an appeal to raise money, or a guilt trip on how to do more in the church, or do more for some type of parachurch organization or nonprofit organization. It's none of those things. There's something even deeper than that. It's a focus call. It's a rally call, if you will, that our eyes truly would be fixed on that which God values. And so let me read to you the first part of this parable. The plan is to break this parable down into two sessions. And the reason is that there's a lot of information in these 16 verses. We don't want to cheat it. And we also don't want it to be too long and cumbersome, because sometimes less is more when you're studying certain aspects of the scripture. And I believe that's the case here with this particular parable. When I think about our small group ministry, there's a difference between a seminar, a class, and a group. We want the groups to carry its weight in terms of fellowship. That's important, in terms of participation within the group. But obviously the study of the Bible is primary. But even in that, we don't want to overload people where it's too much information. We don't want to have all these lessons in our head, but we're not able to apply them because we got too much information. And so this parable especially, we want to break down into two parts. And so part one, we're going to cover verses 14 to 19, and then we'll come back in the next session, the next time we get together, and we'll cover the rest of the parable. But here, starting in verse 14 of Matthew 25, we read the following. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. Let's stop there and let's break this down. What is Jesus talking about? For it will be like a man going to a journey, on a journey. What is he talking about? What is that referring to? Well, in order to truly interpret this, we need the help of the previous verse and the previous parable, which you might remember from two parables ago, 2 sessions ago. Hopefully you haven't forgotten it, but it was the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. You had 5 that were ready and 5 that weren't. And they were incredibly symbolic of the return of Christ and how God will find people. Either they're ready or they're not. Either they believe or they're not. Either they're fake or they're real in terms of their fellowship of Christ. Nevertheless, verse 13, which I want to read, this is what that said. 25:13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day or the hour. Now you might recall in chapter 24, the disciples on a number of occasions, 4 to be exact, kept asking, when's the return going to be? When is it going to be? And Jesus every time said, nobody knows the time. Nobody knows the time. Every time he came back and said it. And he even gave them, a parable at the start of 25 to help say, forget about knowing about the exact time. And I want you instead to have this tangible focus of being ready. And so verse 13 connects to the verses that we're going to read, and really the rest of this parable, as a reminder to be ready. Be ready, be ready, be ready. Well, be ready for what? The return of Christ in our lifetime. And so Jesus now is going to illustrate that. And he says, okay, you got to be ready. And this is another way to be ready. For it's like a man who's gone on a journey. So now we tie it together. He's going to illustrate this kingdom principle as some master who has went away, and he's called his servants and he's entrusted something to them. Now there's a couple of good words here, servants and entrusted. The word servant means to be a willing, a willing vessel, a willing worker for the master. A doulos is the Greek word, and we'll cover that more in our next session. This next word, entrusted, speaks of stewardship. It speaks of an expectation of accountability. And so the servants have been given a certain responsibility with his property. Now listen to how he does it. He's going to give each of them a percentage, if you will, to make investment and to have a return on it, okay? So this is why sometimes people get caught up in money. It's not, though, about money, okay? Don't get caught up in the ancillary details. Here it is, verse 15. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, just 1. To each according to his ability. Now don't miss that. So he gave one person 5 talents, the other he gave them 2, and the last one he gave them 1. Now, this is sometimes where people go, talents, he's talking about abilities, right? Well, it can be symbolic of an ability, but that's not what the parable's talking about. A talent was, according to many ancient reckonings, now it's not, the amount's not important, but let me just tell you what research has shown. Research shows that just 1 talent was worth 20 years of labor. It's a decent, amount of coin, okay? A decent investment, okay? And so you got one who got 5, one who got 2, and one who got 1. And their job was to take that and to multiply that, if you will, to be a good steward of that which was given to them. And each according to his ability. And so what it means is that in God's infinite wisdom, he knows everybody's bandwidth. It's all important, okay? It's like these are prearranged bags, if you will. Here's your bag, you got 5. Here's your bag, you got 2. Here's your bag, you got 1. The job is not to go looking at other people's bags. It's to go take the bag you have been given and be faithful with it. And that's how it always is with God. We don't window shop other people's giftedness, possessions, careers, families, lives. We take that which God has entrusted to us and we use it for his glory. And so the parable begins this way by saying, hey, this is another way to look at the kingdom. That you want to understand that as you wait for the second coming, you're not to wait and to be lazy, you're to be waiting and be faithful. That you're to use whatever the Father has given to you for his kingdom plans. Goes on to say this in verse 16. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So he doubled what he was given. That's a good thing. In our next session, we'll find out exactly what the master says about that when he comes back. So also, he had the 2 talents made, the man with the 2 talents, he had made 2 more talents on top of that. So he doubled what the master gave him. Verse 18, we have a contrast. And note the record. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. He didn't want to lose it, so he hid it. Now, this was not uncommon for people to bury even money for the sake of not losing it or getting robbed, being defrauded. They didn't have banks like we had it, okay? So some people put their money under the mattress, and some people bury their money in ancient times. And so I think his motivation to protect what was given to him, I think that's somewhat commendable. but it wasn't what the master wanted. It was almost as if him saying, you know what? I don't want to get my hands dirty, and I certainly don't want to lose it. And it's going to be too much work to go invest it. Because how did these other guys double their profit? Maybe they bought property. Maybe they loaned out and they got more back. We don't know exactly, because that's not the point of the parable. This isn't a strategy on how to double your profit, as some crazy people who have no business teaching the Bible have tried to do. That's not what this is. And so that's why God doesn't tell us what they did. There wasn't exports and imports. We don't need to get caught up in that. They just doubled their profit. It's an illustration. It's a story to remind us to be faithful. Now, verse 19 says, now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. Let's talk about this parable. Again, there's an interpretation connection. We have this written in your notes. We read it earlier, verse 13. It connects the previous parable in this same chapter. Again, the 10 bridesmaids. And what we find out is the main theme is very similar. See, the main theme in the parable of the 10 bridesmaids was be ready by waiting. Be ready by waiting, verses 1 through 13, Matthew 25. And now in this passage, be ready by working. And see, both of those things are necessary. That if you're going to follow Christ, if you're going to be what God has called you to be, if you're going to be someone who believes in the return of Christ, but not in a way where I'm not doing anything. I'm going to wait on my roof. I'm not going to go to work. I'm not going to hang out with my family. I'm just waiting for the return of Christ, okay, on the top of the roof of the house. Well, that's a little crazy. People can call you crazy. You can call the cops and get you down. That's imbalance there. God's not telling you to do that. Be waiting, like the 10 bridesmaids, okay? Prepare yourself. Preparation, be ready. And we'll explain what that means and how to do that, but be working. Don't be lazy. And I think there's 3 examples here. 2 of these particular servants, they weren't lazy. They even doubled what the master gave them. The master gave them a bag, the master gave them these talents, and they doubled it. The other one was lazy. He buried it. He didn't want to lose it. But in the big picture, he is, because he was controlled by his fears and by his laziness. And then when we see his excuse making later on in this passage, we see just where his heart was. So the main theme is be ready by waiting, but also be ready by working. And so we have this written for you as well. Waiting is about an attitude of alertness. So you might say, how do I wait on God? That's a great question. I wait on God by having an alertness, a vigilance, if you will, to live in a certain way that honors the Lord even when nobody's watching. You know, lots of people, they talk a great game and they do the right thing when there's eyes on them. But how are we living when nobody's watching but the Lord? That's where the rubber meets the road. And we want to be waiting. We want to wait with faith in that which God has said. And we want to wait with our own faithfulness to follow through on that which God has for us. And so we want to wait that way. Now, what does it mean to be working? What do you mean by that? Be ready with working. Working is about an action of availability. We've said for years that one of our best abilities is our availability. You know, there's so many people who are good at a lot of things, but they just don't give God any time. It would be a tremendous mistake to say, okay, yes, I believe in the Bible. I believe in the second coming, but I'm just going to wait and I'm not going to do anything. No, God don't want you to do that. God doesn't want you to do that. You don't want to get to heaven and say that. You want to be someone who's waiting and who's working. And working means about having this action of availability in serving God's purposes. And that's what this parable is bringing us to. And so here's the key thought. Waiting and watching produce, now listen to this, an incredible opportunity for belief and balance. Let's add to this, when you're waiting, when you're watching, and when you're working, don't forget the working part. It creates a balance in your life and a belief in your life. What do we mean by that? It strengthens your belief in that which God has said. which is going to increase your probability of being obedient, even when it's difficult, even when it's politically incorrect, even when your flesh wants to do one thing. You're going to obey God because your belief has been strengthened. We're only going to go as far as our convictions, if you think about it. And so if we have a weak belief system, or weak convictions, then we're not really going to be obedient to God. You can't have one way or the other. So as my belief system is strengthened by being ready, by waiting and by working and watching, okay, my belief strengthens. But then I'm a balanced Christian. Some people are they're not balanced. They're not balanced. I'm so thankful for this parable that it comes after the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, because remember, you had some of these bridesmaids. What good would it have been if they had no oil in their lamp? They're all dressed up, with nowhere to go, okay? There's waiting, but there's also working. Their lamps were filled. When their lamps were empty, they were able to refill them. They were prepared. They were ready for the bridegroom to come. We need to be ready. We need to be ready with our obedience. And we need to be ready by not wasting the opportunities that God gives to us. We don't want to get to the end of our life and having been guilty of squandering the time that God has given to us, the talents that God has given to us, and the treasures that He has blessed us with. We want to be a people who are balanced. We're waiting on the Lord, but we're working. Our sleeves are rolled up, our hands are on the plow, and we're doing the work that God has for us. Now, there's some applicational principles that I want to share with you to help tie this first part of the parable of the talents together. Notice this here in your notes. Number one, this is a foundational principle really for any believer. This is something we should never let depart our heart and our mind. And here it is. God is the owner, and we are the manager. God owns it all, Psalm 20 tells us. God has entrusted to us. In fact, that's the same verbiage that's used in verse 14 here. We're God's steward. What does it mean to be a steward? What does it mean to be someone who is the trustee of something? You're the manager. And the manager doesn't necessarily own it. They're representing the owner. And they're representing the owner in how they conduct themselves with their character. They're representing the owner in their creeds and what they stand for. They're representing the owner in how ultimately they contribute to that particular organization. In this case, this particular property, this investment that was entrusted to them. And so a steward is very important. A manager is very important. God's the owner, and we're the manager. And so this parable, we have three potential candidates, okay, as an example to follow. I would say so far, I think we can safely say that we're going to follow the first two because they weren't lazy. They weren't sitting on their blessings. They weren't sitting on their opportunity. See, when we realize and we come to the conviction that God's the owner and we're the manager, we will not live an imbalanced life. There's a lot of imbalanced Christians, There are some Christians, they're like the entertainment Christians. They go from concert to concert, church to church, and they're just feed me, feed me, feed me. Let me get more and more and more. But they're not doing anything. And eventually, that, like any other fad, that tires out. And those people, they more are fans of Christ than they are followers. And they thin out. The crowd thins out that way. But then there are people who are loyal to the Lord, who recognize that the Lord is the owner and that they are the manager. And God not only uses them, He gives more to them because they were faithful with the little that they originally had. And so God is looking for people who are faithful, that which can be entrusted with more. And when we realize that God is the owner and we are the manager, we're positioning ourselves to be used of God mightily. Number two, we want to understand this principle here. Be faithful to maximize the opportunity he gives to you. When you look here in verses 16 to 18, you have these examples of 3 servants. 2 of them doubled that which was given to them. The other one, not so much. We want to take inventory of where we are right now, and we want to say, am I being faithful with what God has given to me? Or am I making excuses? Am I protecting my own interest? I think that's what the last servant was about. The first 2 servants, not only did they take this responsibility seriously, they produced. And see, that's a formula there. When you're faithful to God, he'll take care of the rest. Trust God, be obedient, and leave the results to him. That's exactly what these first 2 servants did. And so we want to be faithful, and that'll help us maximize our opportunity, because a tremendous tragedy is wasted opportunity that God gives to you. Again, you don't want to get to the end of your days and stand before God and have this long list of wasted opportunities. To circumvent that potential problem and embarrassment, choose to be faithful with that which God has entrusted to you. Now, this last principle is equally important, because we know that the master in this parable, it says the master then is going to return after a long trip away. Now, that phrase there, long time, again, remember the context as we close. What did Jesus say? Nobody knows when the return's going to happen, okay? Just the Father knows. He said that 4 different times already. And so it's as if, I don't know if there's any humor in this, but from when the Lord originally gave it, but did he look at them a certain way? Maybe a smile, a nod, a long time. Did he, did maybe he go a little extra on the L for the long? Because they keep asking. Listen, after a long time, the master of those servants came, and then he settled the accounts. And what that tells us is live in light of the coming evaluation. Let me live my life knowing that one day God is going to evaluate how I've used my life. That I don't want to live recklessly, haphazardly, selfishly. I don't want to be this greedy, self-indulgent Christian. That's a contradiction, by the way, of words. And think that that's okay. It's not. First of all, I'm not going to grow. In God's infinite wisdom, part of spiritual growth is being someone who understands what Jesus said. It's more blessed to give than it is to receive. That's right out of the mouth of Christ. And so I want to live my life in light of knowing that there's a coming evaluation one day. One day I got to give an account for how I live my life. One day. Now that doesn't mean that I have to present a defense for what I've done so I can get into heaven. I either believe or I don't. But we're talking about I don't want to waste my opportunities. And we want to be people, like the theme of this first part of the parable, we're ready by waiting and we're ready by working. That's God's will for us in our lifetime. And so when I look back in this instruction that Jesus gave to his disciples, it was in the context of answering their questions concerning the second coming and also preparing them for how they're to view the kingdom. The kingdom can be thought of in 2 ways. It's the kingdom to come, obviously, that God's going to bring. People are in the presence of God, the kingdom of, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We've prayed it. But God's kingdom is also at work in his people here. And so we want to reflect God here. We don't got to wait to get to heaven to start following that prayer or following God this way. We want to do that now because there will be an evaluation. And we want to live in light of that evaluation. We want to be faithful and not squander the opportunities that God has given to us. And we want to be the type of people that honor God as the owner and serve him as the servant and the manager of that which he has entrusted to us. The parable of the talents, part one. God has called you and I to be people who are working while we're waiting. And until the Lord returns or he takes us home, let us be people who, with humble anticipation, are looking forward to hearing the words that are found later on in this parable. Well done, good and faithful servant. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.